All right, welcome to the show this week. We're going to review week 7 predictions. Overall for the week, 6 and 8. There was definitely some odd games this week, and we'll go ahead and talk about those. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly, and you can see the games that we're going to talk about. And so we'll start off with the good. So let's go ahead and start with that. So first off, we had Seattle versus the Los Angeles Chargers. Sportsbook had the Chargers favored by 6.5 points, whereas I had Seattle favored by it's about 6 or 7, depending on whether or not you're looking at the correlated actual point scores. But that notwithstanding, the actual score turned out to be 37-23. So Seattle outperformed a little bit what was predicted, and the Chargers were pretty much right there within, a little bit outside the 95% confidence interval, but that notwithstanding, pretty darn close. And that's a big part what I focus on here is the best way to predict the outcomes of games is how well are the offensive and defenses going to match up against one another. That doesn't always work, as we'll see as we get to some of the next games. But what I would point out here is Seattle just ran all over them. I predicted a really good day for Seattle to begin with, and they were a little bit above this 75th percentile as they actually rushed for 214 yards overall. They slightly underperformed for passing, Seattle did, whereas the Chargers were within both their passing and their rushing, and the score worked out that way. So that was a good prediction for this week. Let's go back here. So in this case here, the Washington slightly was well within the normal interval and was slightly above the 95% confidence interval, and Green Bay was right within that. So that's a really good, accurate prediction right there. And then when you go through and look at it, Green Bay underperformed both in passing and in rushing. And meanwhile, you had an excellent rushing game that well outperformed what Washington's rushing game was supposed to be. And even though the passing was on the lower end, the fact of the matter is when you rush for 166 yards and you're able to hold, they held Green Bay to 38 yards of rushing and 194 yards of passing. So they were the rushing was uh, well below what they were predicted, well outside that confidence interval, and the passing was at the very low end of it. So overall, when you look at it, this was an excellent week for the prediction, which is always good to see. However, it wasn't all good. So we'll talk about the bad. So with that, we had New York versus Jacksonville. I predicted that Jacksonville was going to win 20. Let's just go ahead. 26-15. Whereas what really happened was New York scored 23 points, so they scored a little bit on the outside of that, and Jacksonville was slightly below what they were predicted. So let's take a look at what happened here. Call this, briefing this in the bad section, is the outcome wasn't what was predicted, but it's also showing that when a team can outperform in one of their predicted areas, you have a corresponding score that goes with that. So again, if you're queuing, if your model is based upon what they've done, and you're now looking, they outperform that, then you would expect a different result, which is the whole point of betting to begin with. Next, the Broncos Jets. So this is one, the model has tended to favor Denver quite a bit because overall, when you look at Denver, they've got some strong points to their game. They don't have any real strong points other than this pass rank here, but that notwithstanding, that's going to tend to hold down opposing offenses. and they've been good enough at their pass and their rush to, by the model, be putting up about 20 points. So what happened here was Denver got held to 9 points, and New York put up 16. So realistically speaking, Denver, New York performed as expected. They put up, or at that, so they put up 16 points. They were right here at this low end. Denver underperformed, and so go ahead and take a look at the passing charts here. So the Jets rushed for 155 yards. And even though they only passed for 105 yards, we weren't really expecting a strong passing game from them to begin with. So they rushed out here for what would have been at the very high end of what we're expecting. And you compare that with Denver, they performed as expected. And I think part of that too is obviously Denver has had they didn't have they had a backup quarterback. They weren't able to punch the ball in when they got in the red zone, so he had some performance issues with that. And then New York performed pretty much as advertised with a little bit of extra rushing. So again, this is one of those where you have to look at the variables of the game, and that is going to happen. And it's within the outcome isn't what was predicted, but you could also see how some of the performances aren't necessarily outside of what was within the realm of possible, and that's going to adjust what some of the outcomes are. Now, that's when we get to the ugly, to where things just don't necessarily make sense. How did we get to this point? So, first off, if anyone watched the game last night, it was a beating. Chicago just whooped up and down on New England, and quite frankly, I don't think anyone really expected that. I know that I didn't, but I didn't really see anyone else picking them either. So the Bears won 33-14, and so when I look at that, this is where neither team was anywhere close. These numbers were basically flip-flopped. The Bears performed or scored about what we're expecting from New England and vice versa. And there's really not a good way to explain how that happened. We were expecting an excellent rushing game from Chicago, and we certainly got that. So we'll take a look at what that looked like. You had Chicago rushing for 243 yards. So they were well up here, well above what they expected. The passing game, while was anemic as expected, but then when we go through it and we look at the Patriots, they could only pass for 190 yards. They got 70 yards on the ground. So and then not to mention, which you really have to look at, is the turnovers as well. So this is one to where it's just hard to wrap your brain around, in that how the outcomes turned out the way that they did is difficult to explain from just normal performance. You had one team that hasn't been performing well outperform in a particularly beneficial way with pass rush. I'm sorry, with not pass rush, with rushing yards. So having that strong run game, and then having New England uncharacteristically, but again, if you look at their turnover and sacks, both teams have this year not been good at it. But New England came out last night and really squandered away some good opportunities. Points. Let's go back up here. And Chicago or San Francisco scored 23. So San Francisco did about what they modeled, but Kansas City just completely, I mean, they more than doubled what I expected them to do. And with that, it just makes you this is one where I have to try and look at it and say, well, what's going on with the model? Why does that happen? And then when I look at it, the model was calling for Patrick Mahomes to pat for about 250 yards. When you look at it, you're like, wow, that's a pretty gosh darn good game. He passed for 417 yards. He's way up here on the high end of what that uh, what was. I mean, he's an outlier, well beyond that. And then likewise, San Francisco had 343 yards. Again, also an outlier, but they weren't able to put the ball in. Then both teams had strong running games, and even though San Francisco performed both cases either as expected or better, uh, Kansas City was able to double that. And then also when you have the turnovers that happened, San Francisco had 3 versus the two of Kansas City. But when those happen, we can really throw off those scores. But any way you put it, when you have 417 yards of passing, you have a very, very explosive offense, which is what we see over here in the upper right hand corner was exactly that. A lot of deep plays for a lot of yards. So that's all I have for week 7 analysis, and I'll be coming out with week 8 predictions here shortly. Have a good day.